to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We have Todd Fletcher. We have Brian Willis, who is our guest tonight, Joe Willis, and Graham Tinius, another guest here. He had a Christmas tree in the back and had to move it, unfortunately. So, but we're glad you joined us. We're a little bit late. We apologize for that. Had some technical difficulties, but I think we're on track now. So, um, without any further ado, I would like to introduce Brian Willis. And Brian, for those that don't know who you are, haven't been to an ILEETA conference, tell us, who is Brian Willis?
Well, from the law enforcement perspective, so I'm a husband, I'm a father, but from the law enforcement perspective in the training world, so I started my law enforcement career 43 years ago in November of 1979 with the Calgary Police Service in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Retired 18 years ago and started my training career. So I've been involved in law enforcement training for 33 years, and I've had the privilege of being a part of ILEETA since its inception. And when Ed Nowicki started ILEETA, they were looking for some international people to be part of the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association, and somebody had recommended that he reach out to me. And so I've had the pleasure of being part of the organization right from the outset. And I've had the privilege of being the deputy executive director for about a decade now, since Ed had to step away for health reasons. So in a nutshell, that's me. My wife and I have been married for 42 years. Our two sons are 39 and 36. And so I'm excited to be here.
Very awesome. What's the weather like up in Canada right now?
Well, compared to, so it was beautiful sunny today. It got a little above freezing, so that was good. Snow, and we've got a fair amount of snow. The snow started to melt, but so it's going to be decent for the next little while. We've had a lot of snow the last few weeks and had some pretty cold temperatures, but it's certainly milder now. But it's November in Western Canada, so to be expected.
I hear you. I hear you. So we'll go around the room here, and Todd, you have anything you'd like to hear from Brian?
So tell us a little bit about winning mind training, what you do in that role, and kind of what your goals are for winning mind.
So winning mind training, there's kind of, I guess, two main elements from a training perspective that I explore through the organization. So one is the training perspective. So I have a program called Excellence in Training, which is really a philosophy about training, about challenging us all to think differently about how we design training, how we deliver training, how we engage people in training, the language that we use. So I teach that in generally 3 or 5 day courses, and it's not about what to teach. It's more about how can we as trainers more effectively teach. How can we teach decision making, enhance critical thinking, train people for critical thinking rather than compliance, and shift away from that model and look at how do we take some of the research, some of the evidence, some of the around how humans learn and how we need to more effectively teach and actually apply that. So the theory is one thing, the application is another part. And then the other main element of what I do is the leadership training. So I have a program called Dare to Be Great that's either a 1 or 2 day leadership workshop that's designed to teach the fundamentals of leadership to people, regardless of their rank, position, and title. Focus on what they control the controllable, and realize that while not everybody in an organization is in a leadership position, everybody in an organization is in a position to lead. And that leadership is not about rank, position, and title. It's about action, it's about interaction. And what we need to do, I think, as a profession is we need to shift from leadership being kind of a role or a title to leading, make it an action, make it a verb, and have everybody understand that everybody can contribute to the organization, the success of the organization. It has to. An organization, in order for it to be successful and have great culture, which is a big part, of the Dare to Be Great program requires everybody. It requires everybody to be on board with that, everybody to accept their responsibility. So those are kind of the main elements. The performance enhancement imagery is something I weave into the Excellence in Training program and also teach as a standalone. So that's really kind of the main focuses right now for me through Winning Mind Training, and hoping to continue to. I think that law enforcement is one of the most challenging, most demanding, most complex, and also potentially most rewarding professions in our society, but it's underappreciated, underserved. And so my mission is to do what I can to help continue to serve the heroic men and women of the profession and give them some tools so that they can live a life of significance, and realize the importance of what they do.
That's a mouthful. Great, great stuff. Joe, what do you have for Brian?
Yeah, so I mean, Brian, you've been at this, for quite some time, and you've got, the reach and have quite a broad network. What's your sense right now for the pulse of the profession, especially in the training environment, and trends you're seeing, and what's your sense for how is the profession doing right now?
I think the profession is at a very critical time. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for us here. In the 43 years that I've been around, we've seen these ebbs and flows and these ups and downs, and we've been through tough times before. I think what's the challenge right now is that for the last couple of years, a number of places have been facing this defund the police movement, and unfortunately, when budgets get cut, training is one of the first things to go. But I think that's incumbent on us as trainers to make sure that we're getting a return on investment for the training that we're doing. We send people to courses, to conferences, to workshops all the time, and the only thing we ask when they come back is, did you get a certificate? Instead of asking, what did you learn? How are you going to apply what you've learned? What are you going to do to share what you learned? And so I think we need to do a better job of getting a return on investment from the training that we are doing. I think we need to move away from this check the box training that's become prevalent, and part of it's being pushed by special interest groups, by politicians, that we just need to check this box, and then we put everybody through whatever the flavor of the day topic is, and then we falsely say everybody has been trained in, whether it's de-escalation or implicit bias or whatever it is, and that's inaccurate. The accurate statement is everybody has attended training in. There's a difference between having attended training in and being trained in. But I think what we need to do is we need to figure out, how do we look at training from pre-hire to post-retire, so that we're looking at this for the long haul, playing the infinite game, and find ways to make every day a training day. And so I'm a huge proponent of 10 minutes a day of training. So if we can take 10 minutes a day at roll call or shift brief and do training, and there's every topic that we teach, we can break down into 10-minute chunks. Well, if you do that 10 minutes a day, 4 days a week, 48 weeks out of the year, that's 32 hours of extra training a year. If you do it 5 days a week, that's 40 hours of extra training a year, and it really costs nothing. But in order to do that, we need to grow the tribe of trainers. So training can't just be the responsibility of Brian and Todd and Joe and Graham, people that wear a formal trainer hat. It should be everybody in the organization. We need to find a way to bring everybody in the organization into the training world, because we have so much expertise around investigations and report writing and testimony and mental preparation. And many of those people with that expertise are not formal trainers, but we need to find a way to get them involved. And I think that 10 minutes a day, we could create massive databases of small training chunks that frontline supervisors could pull out of that and use at the start of a shift. And there's a lot we can do. So I think it's a tremendous time of opportunity. It's certainly a time of challenge, but it's a time of opportunity as well. And more people are understanding the importance of training. And there's people like yourselves and the members of ILEETA and so many good people out there that are sharing the same message, that I think we're starting to move in the right direction. We're starting to see a shift that people realize the flaw in the defund the police mentality. And so now it's just a matter of figuring out what can we do collectively as a profession, and trainers understanding that they're in one of the most influential training roles in the profession. And then what piece of this do we own and what can we do to enhance it? And that includes organizations like the National Association of Field Training Officers that Graham's heavily involved with, Blue Help, and there's so many organizations doing so many good things that we just need to stay the course and keep all plugging along and make understand that we can make small changes. And there's a great question that what's the smallest change that you can make that will make the biggest difference? And I think when we glom onto that question and look to continue to make small changes, then they can have, but it's small changes that give us the biggest return on investment, then we can start to have massive changes to the profession. And then that just carries on long term.
Thank you.
Absolutely agree with everything you just said there. I wish more and more administrators would tune in and listen to this, and hopefully we can share that video with a lot of those folks that are the decision makers in training, and sergeants and trainers and everybody, because I think there's a wealth of wisdom that you just gave us in that little short amount of time. Graham, you're up.
Yeah. So Brian, you talked about growing the tribe of trainers, and ILEETA, like NAFTA, is a membership organization. So we're only as powerful as the number of our members that we can keep actively engaged. So kind of generically, a larger question like, what's the future of ILEETA, and what's the future of its role in law enforcement training in the future? But more specifically, how do we, as ILEETA members, ILEETA instructors, as people who are involved, what do we do to make sure that we're fostering the future of this organization moving forward?
So I think the future of the organization is very bright because of the people that we have in the organization. What makes ILEETA special? Part of it is the way that Ed and Harvey set it up from the inception, that it's an organization of peers. Nobody's better than anybody else. And so leave your ego at home, come with an open mind and an open heart, and share what you have, and everybody learns from everybody else. That philosophy has prevailed throughout the entire duration of ILEETA as an organization. And so we see people like yourselves that are actively involved. I think what everybody needs to understand is we go back to Brian's comment about administrators, and I hear this from trainers, and I hear this in leadership workshops, and the message I keep coming back is focus on what you control and control the controllable. Focus on what you control and control the controllable, and understand that everybody is in a position of influence. So I might have influence with 2 or 3 people, but those 2 or 3 people have influence with 2 or 3 people, and those 2 or 3 people have influence with 2 or 3 people. And so I think that if everybody understands that, and if everybody, again, we go back to everybody in ILEETA is in a position to lead. The leadership leading in ILEETA is not based on a title of the director, deputy executive director, or advisory board member. It's the rank and file. It's the members that are willing to go out and do the work. And I think if trainers realize the influence that they have, trainers, and when I'm talking about trainers, I'm talking about academy trainers, field trainers, and in-service trainers are in one of the most influential leadership positions in the organization and in the profession. And if we accept that responsibility, and if we work as yourself, Graham, and many others are working to make sure that the T in the FTO stands for trainer, teacher, coach, mentor, then I think if we can influence those people at the academy level, and then if we can influence the frontline, the FTOs, and if we can influence the frontline supervisors, that's the bulk of the profession. So my former agency is about 2,300 sworn officers. 96% or 98% of them, well, say 92 to 96% are the rank of sergeant and constable, or sergeant and officer. That's the vast majority of the organization. And every police organization is the same. So if we focus on the foundational level, the officers, the deputies, the troopers, the constables, and the frontline sergeants, or the frontline supervisors, including FTOs, corporal sergeants, and in a lot of places, lieutenants, or the equivalent like a staff sergeant in Canada, then that's how we make the greatest impact. If we're going to wait for change to come from the top down, it's not going to happen. You know, and as Scott Mann, a retired lieutenant colonel with the Special Forces, says, nobody's coming. Like, nobody's coming to bail us out. We need to do this ourselves, but it needs to be done at the foundational level. If we are fortunate enough to have great leaders at the top, terrific. But if we take responsibility, everybody takes responsibility for our piece of the organization, we can change organizations overnight. And for people that are suffering with bosses in formal leadership positions, as George Reed, a retired colonel from the U.S. Army, explained to me, he said, when you focus on the foundational level and the frontline people, then you can make bad bosses at the upper echelon irrelevant. So I think the key is for us to focus on what we control the controllable, and focus on our piece of the organization. If we all do that, then we can make drastic changes. And then those changes, when we're focusing on developing the next generation, they're the future leaders. They're the future sergeants and lieutenants and captains and inspectors and chiefs and deputies and sheriffs. But we need to focus on them. We need to get away from this old school mentality and still in too many academies of shut your mouth and do what you're told, and the screaming and the yelling and all of the stuff that is not conducive to teaching people to think critically. It's training them for compliance, and we need to shift away from that and focus on us as a profession. But I think when we focus on what we control the controllable, focus on our piece of it, I think that's where we make the huge impact. And that's, I think, what the members at ILEETA. Now, we're fortunate at ILEETA that we have people that are in senior leadership positions, chiefs, and other people that are members of the organization. But the vast majority at the foundational level. And let's understand that we have the ability to perhaps make the greatest impact at that level.
Powerful stuff. You know, we do. ILEETA has some of the best instructors in the world, most influential people in the world. What are some things that we can do, those of us watching, to recruit new members so we can get this message out and really make a huge impact on America, on the North America, Canada, United States, across the country, across the pond? How do we get?
Well, I think we go back to focus on what you control and your span of influence. So talk to those people that are in your sphere of influence. And when you get out, and many trainers also have side businesses, or members of ILEETA have their own training companies, then, you know, I think that Todd Fletcher sets the bar for this. So Todd, when he and his wife teach, not only do they do a great job of teaching and develop world-class trainers and teachers, but they talk about ILEETA, and then they give a membership and a scholarship to somebody at the end of every course. And it's not just randomly picks it out. They're picking people that demonstrate those leadership skills and abilities that would be reflective of what we want to accomplish and achieve as an organization. So I think that's the key, is that when people are out, when they're talking to other trainers, when they're at other conferences, and this isn't actively going and trying to poach people when you go to the NAFTO conference or somewhere else, but those people at those conferences are also trainers. So look at your sphere of influence, and when you have the opportunity, talk to people about the benefit, bring them into the organization, and then mentor them and develop them. So I think that's the way that we grow that. And then I think the other key piece is that for those that attend the conference, when you go back from the conference, share what you learned. Be intentional when you're there about writing down your takeaways and reflecting on your takeaways from every class that you teach, and write out takeaways and possible action steps. And then when you go back, share that. And it might be over a course of weeks where you share, here's this class I took from Joe Willis, or here I took this class from Gray and Tinius about the 10 case law decisions that every FTO needs to know. And share some of your takeaways and just share how we can apply that. because what happens a lot of times is people go to a conference, say like ILEETA, and then I go back to my agency and somebody says, well, how was that conference? Oh, it was great. Well, what did you learn? Oh, there's just so much stuff there. You really have to go. Well, then we're not getting a return on investment.
Yeah.
Now, even if I pay my own way, and a significant number of the people that come to our conference pay their own way and budgets are tight. But even if I pay my own way, still share, go back and be intentional about sharing so that people see the value of being part of an organization that's involved in and committed to the professional development of trainers to raise the bar for the profession as a whole. So we need to be intentional about that. I understand. I know budgets are tight. I know people have a lot of responsibilities, but a friend of mine who's an ILEETA member, what he and his wife do is every time they have a $5 bill, they just throw it in a jar in a room in their house. And they use that to pay, and they go on some really great vacations, but they used to pay for their vacations. What if every time you had a $5 bill, you put it away somewhere and you use that to pay for professional development training, like going to the ILEETA conference or going to other professional development training? But there's, we can take advantage of, there's podcasts, there's books, there's a tremendous amount of knowledge out there. So that's what I would encourage people to do. Take and share what they've learned, have people see the value of being part of the organization, the value of watching events like these live events that you guys put on, and then have people understand that, you can reach out, not just to the four of you, but to anybody in ILEETA and say, hey, this is who I am. I'm looking for some information on this. Or do you have a recommended reading list? Or do you have recommendations for podcasts? Or what should I be learning? So, for example, Michael Warren, every time Michael and I talk, one of his first questions is, what are you reading? And then I ask the same question to him. And then, it would cost us a bunch of money to be buying books all the time. But you're constantly getting new ideas, right? So, I had breakfast a week ago with an ILEETA member, and as a result of our conversation, he's got a new book to read and a new podcast to listen to, and I have a new book that I'm reading and a new podcast that I'm following, and this is going to take me down a deep rabbit hole with this. So I think that's the key, that interaction, and then ask those questions, right? What are you reading? What podcasts are you listening to? What books are you reading or listening to? What would you recommend for me? And then just keep going down that rabbit hole. There's a ton of information out there.
So I want to, you brought up what we do with our classes, but I want to ask you, this is a two-part question. Number one, do you remember how that started? And number two, talk about, you kind of touched on it, but talk about when you go to training, the making connections part that I think is very special about ILEETA compared to a lot of other conferences that I've been to.
So I don't actually remember how it started because I'm old. I'm officially a senior citizen now, and my memories sometimes wane on things. But I think the connection piece is important, and I'll come back to you and you can explain how it started. But I think the connection piece is important, and I think what people need to understand, and people have heard me talk about this at the conference, I'm not about networking. So I think people need to, for some people, going to the social hours and the hospitality room is their gig. But for those of us that are introverts, that's not our thing. You're not going to find me in the hospitality at a hospitality suite. But I think what people need to understand is the value of that networking, of sitting down with somebody, having a conversation with somebody at a conference, and very quickly moving beyond so who are you, what agency are you with, what do you teach, and talk about some of those other critical things. What challenges are you facing? What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in the last year, and how did you overcome those as a trainer? What are some of the things that you're reading? So, and at the conference, talk to people about, hey, what classes did you go to, and what feedback would you have for me, and share that. And again, to try and, because what we all see at conferences is people go with the group of people that from their agency or that they know, and they hang out with that same group all week. So they all go to the same classes together, and they all go to dinner together and stuff. You see those people all the time. So meet new people. Go and sit down at lunch with somebody that you don't know. Or when you're in a class and you're talking to somebody before class, introduce yourself and find out, and then ask some of those challenges. And if you can make one new connection a day, say at a conference, a 5-day conference, well, those are critical. Because it's not just a bunch of business cards that I'm going to stuff in a drawer somewhere. It's somebody that I can reach out to. And I know that I can reach out to any of you or a multitude of other people from ILEETA, and you might not know the answer, but you know somebody that does. And so it's that 6 degrees of separation. So if I know somebody that I can reach out to, because people will reach out to me and I say, well, I don't know. I don't have that answer. I don't have that information. That's not my area of expertise. But I know somebody that does. So then I'll connect people. So I think that's the other piece, is that we need to make those connections, and we need to be those connectors to continually connect people with other people that have that information that can set them on that path.
Well, to go back, you issued a challenge. This is back in 2017. You issued a challenge to a group of instructors, and that was, what are you doing to build ILEETA? And that has grown into, for example, last year at the writers' dinner, what are you doing to get new people to submit articles for the journal? It even evolved into, what are you doing to get new instructors to present at ILEETA? So that one challenge that you issued over 5 years ago has grown legs. So, and
well, that's good, and there's
some.
some. Well, it's easy to issue the challenge. It's another piece for people like yourself, Todd, to pick up that challenge and run with it. And you've done some amazing things with that. And there's others that have done that as well. But it's an ongoing process that we need to continue to challenge people to make those connections, but then reach out and continue to share. The best way to drive people to organizations is to show the value. The best way to show the value is share what you're learning. And if people go, wow, I could use some of that, then they'll get involved.
It's just one way to improve the training in our profession.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one of the things that I think many of us are familiar with, you kind of wrote a piece on how to convince your agency to send you to ILEETA. And there's so much wrapped into that, but wondering if, from the time you initially started kind of sharing on that, if you could expand on it just a little bit. Have you had any additional insight on it? And for those that haven't had a chance to read it, kind of tell us, you got to walk in there and have this conversation. Send me to ILEETA. Why should I go? The conference.
And so so I think what people need to do is they need to look at once the list of presenters and the topics come out, then spend some time going through there and reflect on what are the biggest challenges facing our agency right now that we could address from a training perspective. And then find some of those classes. What are some of my personal areas that I need to grow in as an instructor? And then identify some of those classes. But then take that to whoever your supervisor is and say, look, here's this conference. It brings law enforcement trainers from around the world together. And it's a premier event, and everybody's there to enhance the profession. So here's the printout of all of the sessions that are being offered. These are the ones that I think might directly benefit the organization. These are the ones that I think would make me a better trainer instructor. But have a look through them, and then have your supervisor identify a couple of those classes that they believe could benefit the organization directly, but then make the commitment that when and put dates on the calendar. So create this accountability piece where you, before you even go to the conference, where you've got a commitment that on these dates at these times we're going to meet, and I will share takeaways from every class that I went to. I'll provide a brief overview on the instructor and the content of the presentation, and then I will provide my takeaways and some potential action steps for this, and then any additional resources that I picked up out of that. So I might have picked up some research papers, some books, or some other things that might be of value to us as an organization. And so put that on the calendar, and it's maybe meeting with just your supervisor, maybe a separate meeting with your peers, your fellow trainers, or it may be meeting with all of them. Or you might meet with the command staff and share some of those takeaways with the command staff. And here's some things that we could do that we could weave into what we're doing already to enhance our current training. And I think the key is that a lot of these things you can weave in, and there's no cost to the organization because budgets are always an issue. So if you can come back and say, here's what we could do to enhance these programs, here's what we can do to take what we're currently doing and do it differently or do it better, then I think that becomes key, right? And then have those discussions with them, because a lot of times people will say, well, that would never work, or you could never do that here. Well, then shift the question. Say, okay, if it could work, how could we do it? How could we make this work? How could we implement spaced repetition or spaced practice? Or how could we do some of these other elements? There's a lot of real simple things that we can do if we understand the application of these tools. And that goes back to the importance of the connections that Todd asked about, and having those deeper conversations. So make that connection with the trainer that you want more information on a topic, and then set up a time later to have a Zoom call or a phone call to have a deeper conversation about this topic, so that you have a better understanding of it, and then it can help you to apply that as well. So I think it's an ongoing thing, but we need to show how there's a return on investment. And if you're going to send multiple people from an agency, then go to multiple classes, go to different classes. Don't go to the same classes, especially not together. Now you might say, well, I really want to go to Brian Hill's class, and the other people, somebody else wants to go to Brian Hill's class as well. Okay, well, if Brian Hill is teaching an hour and 45-minute class, then you could both go, but go at different times. Because Brian Hill's presentation is not going to be the same on Monday as it is on Thursday, because there's different people, there's going to be different conversations, I'll learn different things. So we might go to the same presentations, but go at different times throughout the week, because those interactions are going to be radically different. The core information that the instructor is presenting is the same, but the interactions and the conversations will be different, and you'll learn far more. And again, you'll make different connections in that class when you're involved in the exercises. So show how they're going to get a return on investment. And you might need to be willing to do some give and take. So sometimes the way we get there the first time is say, okay, well, if you'll give me the time off, I'll pay the conference fee out of my own pocket or something. But sometimes we need to be willing to do some give and take, but make sure that we get a return on investment by sharing what we know, and be intentional about putting those things on the calendar. Otherwise, life is going to get in the way when you get back. Things are busy, and it's never going to happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe increase that $5 donation to your pot to $10. I know you're talking about. I've seen that jar in the closet in the kitchen in that house there.
Yep. Another big Red fan, so they're everywhere, those Nebraska fans. Yep.
We are. We just need to start winning.
Yeah.
ILEETA has, I think it's the biggest bang for your buck, and it should be an easy sell. But I get, you mentioned we all get the budget issues. There's a lot of us in the past that have went on our own dime. We've paid and we've shared rooms. That's an option to help mitigate the cost there. So just look at the course selection from leadership to firearms training, and it's all instructor level courses. And outside of those classes, the learning that we have in the hallways with the connections and the relationships that we build. I think I've said this almost every single ILEETA live, that ILEETA is like a family. And when we have a question, we need an answer. We're having a bad experience in our agency with a training issue. We can pick up the phone and we can call anybody in the organization and we can get answers quickly. If one person can't answer the question, somebody else can. That is what is so powerful about the ILEETA organization. It is just phenomenal.
And I think that goes back to, Ed and Harvey were very intentional right from the start that this is an organization of peers. Because we've all been to places where there's clearly this hierarchy, and if you're new, then somehow you don't count or you don't have a voice. That's never been the case with ILEETA. Some of the newest people have some of the greatest ideas, and they sometimes have the most to teach us. So it goes back to John Wooden had a quote that said, "Mentoring is why you should get up every day to teach and to be taught." So it's always a two-way street. And so everybody that teaches at ILEETA learns from the people that are there. We learn from each other, but that becomes no matter how long you've been in the profession. There's some people that have more notoriety than others. There's people that have written a bunch of books, but you know what? They're there to learn, and when they're not teaching, they're going to classes, and that becomes a great thing with ILEETA. Anybody who showed up with a big ego, thought they were special and need to be treated special, they just don't come back because they don't fit in. So I think for people, regardless of how long you've been involved in training, or I think the other piece is to look at it as a development for future trainers. So that's the other piece I would encourage people to do is, so if you're already an existing trainer, an experienced trainer, and you're going to the conference, can you bring along somebody who's an up and coming trainer, somebody that you can mentor, somebody you can groom, somebody you can develop, that they may not be in a formal training role right now, but that's their goal. And then when they get a piece of that and see that what's available, what's out there, because we don't know what we don't know. And if you don't go, then you don't know what you don't know. So that's one of the biggest things for us is when we go to this conference, we go, holy crap, I had no idea. Or I've never heard of that, or I've never heard of this. So like I said, the breakfast last week, Chris Butler, who's a great trainer, he's been a friend and a mentor for a long time. He's sharing some information on Dr. Rob Gray, who's involved in the whole field of ecological psychology, which I'd never heard of, but it's critical for us from training physical skills and motor skills. But if we don't go to these things, if we don't have these conversations, then we don't know what we don't know. And so when you go there, don't just go to things that you're already really good at. Go to areas where you know a little bit, or it might look like an interesting topic, but you don't know a lot about it. Go and find out. And sometimes it'll drive that, inspire you to do a deeper dive into that, and it will make you a substantially better trainer.
This is kind of an exciting time right now because the instructor class proposal acceptance emails have just recently come out, and there are people posting their acceptance emails on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and I love that. I love it because it shows buy-in of our membership. It shows ownership of their portion of ILEETA, and it gets me excited because I'm seeing all these different classes that are being posted on Facebook, on social media, that are coming up in March, and I'm already starting to take notes on classes that I want to attend on topics that, quite frankly, just like you said, probably know next to nothing about, which is the reason why I want to attend them. But it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I think that people, when they go, that's what they need to pay attention to. They need to look at the fact that, Todd Fletcher doesn't just go to firearms classes, and Noel Aher doesn't just go to firearms classes when they're there. You're going to classes on leadership. You're going to classes on instructional design. You're going to classes on how do we take the science and the evidence and apply it. And that's, I think, what people need to pay attention to. They need to pay attention to the fact that, John and Vicki Farnham, who are legendary in the law enforcement training world, when they're not teaching, they're in other people's classes. And they're going to classes with instructors that they don't know the instructor. They've never heard the instructor, but the topic is of interest to them. So they will go and they will learn, and then they will turn around and share that information with other people. So I think that's what people need to pay attention to as well, is we need to have a couple of expertise where we go deep, but we need to have this broad exposure and a broad knowledge about some of these areas, or many of these areas, and then we need to continue to figure out how do we connect the dots. And that goes back to the importance of connection and asking questions and having those conversations in the hallway. Okay, so you talked about this, or we talked about this in this class. How do you see that being applied in firearms? Or how do you see that being applied in instructional design? Or how do you see that being applied in the FTO world, or from a perspective of leadership or wellness? And then talk about, because that's the piece that we need to figure out, is the application of the information. Information in and of itself is of limited value until we figure out how it's connected to other information, and then what's the application of the information. And that's where the gold is. And that's what comes out of these conversations, that we start to have these aha moments. Oh yeah, I've never thought of that, or I've never thought of it that way, or that may, oh, and geez. And then we start doing a deeper dive. So it's just it's a continual evolution, continual learning.
I know we talked a lot about ILEETA, but I was really excited to find out that you were going to be on the call tonight, because I wanted to ask you questions personally. And I know that what I know about you is that you're extremely humble. You just said that you're an introvert, so I hate to put you on the spot a little bit. I don't really hate to. You've had an extremely long career. I don't know if you know this or not. You've had a lot of impact on me as a law enforcement trainer. You taught a below 100 class in Arizona, probably 14, that I attended. And it wasn't just the material, it was you as a presenter. That class literally changed my life. It immediately changed the way that I live my life on a daily basis from the moment I stepped out of those doors. I wouldn't shut up about it. I came back, I ended up having a courageous conversation with one of my coworkers that would drive very quickly and occasionally not wear her seatbelt. And that was, those courageous conversations that we talk about are difficult, but I had that conversation with her. 4 months later, she got in an accident. She was hit by a DUI driver who never hit the brakes coming up behind her. And first she sent me a picture of her patrol car, and then she sent me a text that said, "I'm alive because of you," because I was wearing my stupid seatbelt. So that to me it's just like this ongoing ripple effect. Through having attended that class, we incorporated part of below 100 into our FTO schools so that we're passing it on to more people, right? So I'm going on about this, A, because I'm fangirling, but B, because you're that pebble in the pond that has had a widespread ripple effect on law enforcement. And I know that you know that you've had an effect. I don't know if you know to what extent that you've had an effect, that just you presenting that material has changed into that material being presented to hundreds, if not thousands of officers. So I think that's amazing. I think you're amazing. The question for you is, when you look back on your career and your legacy within law enforcement training, what are you most proud of?
I guess I'm probably most proud of the fact that I'm still here. I'm still passionate about it. And it's, I want to thank you for the very kind words. It's very nice of you to say. And, every once in a while as a trainer, we get those phone calls where somebody will say, or an email, somebody says, "Hey, what you taught me saved my life," or somebody says, "I became a trainer because of you." But I think what trainers need to understand is that you have a far greater, all trainers have a far greater impact than you understand. There's a quote from Henry Adams that says, a teacher's influence goes to eternity. You never know where your influence ends, something to that effect. And I think the reality is that all trainers have that impact that they don't know. I've been very fortunate that I worked with some great people in my agency. I was fortunate to be the sergeant in charge of a training unit where we were a full-time training unit, super busy, but I worked with a group of people every day that loved coming to work every day, loved learning, loved teaching, loved training, and we were all willing to challenge each other and challenge the status quo. And then I've had a lot of people throughout my career that have been very good to me, that were very gracious towards me, that helped me to develop, that helped me to figure some of these things out, and helped me to learn and open up a lot of doors. Ed Nowicki, when he reached out to me to be one of the advisory board members, Ed didn't know me. Ed had never met me. So one of the other advisory board members, or a couple of them, have given him my name, and based on that, on good faith, he reached out to me. And so I've had so many of those things that people have been so good to me to help me on this journey and are continuing to help me on this journey. And I've had so many people that I've reached out to pick their brains about stuff or to interview them, and they've been so gracious with their time. So, I think it's just, I think if we can, I think what we need to focus on, and I touched on this briefly before, significance, not success. I think success in society is just false measures. So how many awards do you get, and how many followers do you have, and all of these kind of things. But I think what we need to look at is significance, the impact that you have the ability to make in somebody's life. And if you just impact one person's life in that class today, then it was worth it. And there's some days where it's super challenging being a trainer, and you all know how much work it is. But I think that I'm proud of the fact that people have been willing to invest in me and bring me along on that. And I'm eternally grateful for that and for everything that everybody has done over the years to help me. And like I said, that years ago, Ed was gracious enough to reach out to me, didn't know me, and brought me into the organization. And it's been a great experience for me to be part of this. So.
To springboard off of what Graham had just asked you and mentioned about you being the pebble in the pond. At this point, I guess a two-part question here. You've interviewed probably hundreds of people, and it's something that you're very passionate about. And so do you have an exact count on the number of people you've interviewed for either Excellence in Training or Learning Lab or whatever? That's question number one. Question number two would be, of that, who's had the greatest influence on you? And it doesn't necessarily have to be one person, but some people who have had the greatest influence on Brian.
So number of interviews through the Excellence in Training Academy, I have done about 385 hour-long interviews. And those interviews are a tremendous opportunity to learn and I did probably 85 for the ILEETA Learning Lab before we kind of paused it. And so those interviews are a tremendous learning opportunity. But for the Excellence in Training Academy, the preparation for each interview is generally between 2 and 10 hours per interview. So that's where a lot of the learning, because I don't like to just show up and say, hey, I heard you wrote a book. If they wrote a book, I want to read the book and do follow up on some other information. So there's a tremendous amount of learning that comes from that. As far as who's had the most impact, I think probably if I go back to my time with the Calgary Police Service, that group of people that I got to work with every day, the officers that I had the opportunity to work with day in, day out. So, I mean, we were boots on the ground teaching probably 32 to 40 hours a week, 48 weeks out of the year. We were busy. And yet they showed up every day with a great attitude. They were always reading. They were always learning. They were always taking courses. They were willing to go to training on their own time. And we were always challenging each other, and they were always willing to challenge me as the sergeant to say, hey, Brian, you say this over here and you do this over here. I think those are contradictory. How do we rectify that? Or, this drill that you started, or when you teach this, I think there's a better way. And so they probably had the greatest influence on me when I was new in that, or newer in that role. And then I've just had the opportunity to be around some tremendous people. And a lot of that comes from organizations like ILEETA, just the quality of people that you meet there, and people like yourselves. And there's so many other people that are so influential in the organization, have been around, that it's just, there's a lot of people that have, like I said, have been willing to invest in me. When I look at all those people that I interviewed, they got nothing out of it. So I didn't pay them. I mean, I had one guy that I never did interview that he wanted $6,000 to do an hour-long interview. But everybody else, and some of them are some hugely influential and very much in demand people. They carve time out of their schedule and were willing to give me their time and share their information with me so that we could pass it on to other people. So there's been so many people that have invested in me and shared with me that have just helped me to continue to stay inspired on this path. And when you have those down days, that it's people like yourselves and other people in the organization that pick you up and say, okay, yeah, now I remember, I go back to why we're doing what we're doing, and it's important.
Awesome. Thank you. And I really appreciated the how you mentioned that it was this group of people who you were their sergeant, who were incredibly influential for you in a period of time in your life that was formative in this space. And I think sometimes in the moment as leaders, if we're present and with them in that space and give them what they need, they give us so much more in return. And it meant, I really appreciated your perspective on that. Thank you.
Well, and I appreciate that. And some of those people like Chris Butler are still mentoring me today and still teaching me today. And so I think that what we need to understand is that some of the greatest trainers, one of the absolute best trainers that I know, and one of the best trainer leaders that I know, is a sergeant with the Calgary Police Service by the name of John Warren. And outside of the Calgary Police Service and some police agencies in Alberta, most people have never and probably never will hear of John Warren. And that's what we need to understand, is there's so many great trainers out there that nobody else has heard of outside of their organization, but they are doing absolutely amazing things and having a huge impact. So I think that goes back to the significance and the impact. It's not about how many likes you have or followers, or how many people know your name. It's, are you making a difference? And there's a guy who wrote a submission for one of the books we published, and he wrote about Bill was a teacher before he became a law enforcement officer, and he wrote about a practicum teacher of his who challenged him and gave him this one gem when he was a young student teacher, and he carried with him for 25 years and wrote this article. And in the article, he just kept referring to Mr. B. And so I challenged him. I said, "Who's Mr. B?" He said, "Well, his name is Lee Burak." I said, "Why don't you use his name?" He said, "Well, I don't have permission." I said, "Well, you're saying nice things about him. It's not like he's going to sue you, but if you think you need permission, reach out." So he did, and he called Lee Burak, and he said, he said, "I don't know if you remember me." And Lee said, "Absolutely, I do." And they talked for a while, and Bill said, "Do you still challenge the kids you teach with this philosophy?" And Lee said, "Yeah." But he said, "I always wondered if it ever made a difference, because you're the only person I've ever heard back from."
Wow.
So I think that's the piece, right? So if those trainers that are out there that think, well, nobody knows my name, everybody started that way. And it doesn't matter how many people know your name. Show up every day, do a great job for the people you have the privilege and the honor of teaching, training, coaching, and mentoring and serving. Worry not who knows of you, seek to be worth knowing, as Confucius said. And just focus on making an impact, and the rest will just look after itself.
Thank you.
All of us here were that trainer. We're nobodies, and yeah, it's a lot of hard work, but it's worth it when you see some of those people that you train becoming better, and then going out and them training other people, making them better.
Absolutely.
We're kind of winding down on the clock. I want to be mindful of training. I know we could stay here and pick your brain forever, and I'd love to do that, but I want to be mindful of your time there. I'll ask 2 questions here, then we'll go around the room, and then I'll give you the last word as everybody else finishes up their question. But my 2 questions. You're a man that loves to read. I love to read as well. What book are you reading now? And what book would you recommend to the trainers watching this to better themselves as a trainer?
The one I'm reading right now is by Dr. Rob Gray, and it's How We Learn to Move. And so he's the gentleman I talked about with the ecological psychology, but it's about how to better and more effectively teach movement. And it's fascinating, and he has a podcast, and he's a professor at, I believe, at Arizona State University. But from what I've read so far, it's a fabulous book, and I've been listening to some of his other content and kind of going down this deep rabbit hole. But the other one that I read just a little while ago by Steve Magnus is called Do Hard Things. I think every trainer, especially every academy trainer in North America, needs to read that book, Do Hard Things, because it's about rethinking this whole area of toughness and getting away from some of the crap that we still see in too many academies today, and understanding what toughness actually is and how to teach it. So it's a book that I think every trainer should read.
Thanks, Brian. Todd, last question, thought for Brian?
Uh, I'm just happy to have you on ILEETA Live and be able to see you and talk to you. Looking forward to seeing you in March. And what do we give us a little hint at what we have to look forward to at the ILEETA conference when you do your opening ceremonies spiel?
The opening ceremonies spiel. So for those that haven't been to the conference, Harvey is gracious enough to give me a few minutes to speak at the opening ceremonies, and he's gracious enough not to vet it before I speak, to just kind of turn me loose. But this year is going to be a challenge to trainers that there's some things where we need to do better, where we owe our people more, we owe our people better. And I'll just leave people with this thought from Sidney Decker, who's one of the world experts in human error, that we can blame or we can learn, but we can't do both. And we need to stop blaming and start learning and start looking in the mirror and get away from this crap of people jumping on these bandwagons on social media and blaming officers for stuff when they don't know anything about what happened. They don't know anything about the details or anything about the officer's background or their training. And we owe each other more. And we need to step back from that and go have a look in the mirror and have a look at your training. So it's going to be a challenge. It's going to challenge people that we need to do better. We owe the people that we have the privilege and the honor of training more and better.
Just more stuff to look forward to.
Awesome. Before I pass it over to Joe, Mary Grace posted that the course list is available already on the ILEETA website. I just checked it out. It's there. So go to the 2023 ILEETA course page and you can see all the courses that are there. So if you need some help justifying your agency paying your way, there's a list of courses there. Reach out to anybody on this call and we can help you out. So Joe,
And
you're up.
Just before you go to Joe, on that note, if you're going to the conference, find Mary Grace. She'll be around during the Vendor Expo, and thank her. She's the backbone of this organization. And she's in the background all the time. People don't see her. People don't necessarily know her name. But Mary Grace Barbie is the heart and the soul and the backbone of this organization. And without her doing what she does all year long, this organization wouldn't still be around. So find her and thank her when you're there.
And she is watching here, and I just want to say, Mary Grace, thank you. Joe, you're next.
And so all the questions I've running through my head would just drag us on for so much longer. There's just so many, like Brian said. But thank you very much for being here with us tonight, number one. And in a nutshell, for the ILEETA body that attends the conference, a sentence or two, how do you get the most out of it? What advice would you give? Get the most out of the conference. Put a bow on it for us.
Go with an open mind. Take lots of notes. Strive to make one new connection a day, and then be intentional when you go back about sharing what you learned. And even if that doesn't result in us getting any new members, the only way that the profession will continue to grow and enhance is if you go and learn from your peers, your brother and sister trainers, and then be intentional about sharing what you learned. And again, if you don't go, you don't know what you don't know. So go and find out, and then be intentional about going back and sharing.
I just wanted to hear you say that. If you don't go, you don't know what you don't know. One more time. Thank you.
My pleasure.
And then I'll wrap it up with whether it's your opening speech or the class that you're presenting, or maybe a class that you've already found out that you plan on sitting in on, or knowing you, just kind of a life philosophy that's bouncing around inside your head right now. What are you most excited to talk about in March?
What I'm most excited to talk about is so I'm going to be doing a 3-hour and 45-minute class during the week, and then a different one on the Saturday for those that are still around on the Saturday. And the focus will be about leadership and culture. And I think that if people want to address retention and recruiting, have great leadership in your organization and great culture in your organization. People that can make the greatest impact on that are the trainers. And that's, like I say, the academy trainers, the in-service trainers, FTOs, the field trainers have a massive impact on that. So we need to focus on creating cultures of leading, learning, and excellence within our organizations that are built on a foundation of curiosity and candor and belonging and values. And so be curious when you go to the conference, and then take that back and look to build that, take a leadership role in your organization and build that culture of leading, learning, and excellence, and weave that into the fabric of your organization. When you do that, the way that Dr. Gabrielle Salfati is a professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, what she says is that stress is operational and burnout is organizational. Stress is operational, burnout is organizational. So if we can adopt that philosophy from Gabrielle, then the antidote and the cure to burnout is leadership and culture. And trainers are in one of the most influential leadership positions in their organization and in this profession, and have a massive impact on culture. So those are some of the things that I'm excited to talk with fellow ILEETA members about, and figure out how can we do a better job of that within the profession.
That's great. And I'm excited to talk about that with you in March. I look forward to seeing you in person and hearing that.
Likewise, thank you.
For those of you who leave early on Saturday or leave on Friday, this is your reason to stay on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. So before I pass it over to Brian for the last word, I just want to give a shout out to all those ILEETA members, and maybe some folks that aren't ILEETA members. Write an article for the journal. The articles are due on December 10th. We'll give you a day or two leeway if you're struggling, but we want you all to write for our journal. So just reach out to me, reach out to Kim Schlau, Carrie Avery, Thomas Dvorak, and we will get you published in an international publication. So it's a great benefit for the members in the organization, and it's a great benefit to you to get to put on your resume that you are a published article in international publication. So with that said, Brian, I will leave it up to you to give the last word of wisdom, nuggets of wisdom that you have for our ILEETA members.
I just want to challenge people to think long term. think about training from pre-hire to post-retire, and that this is something that we do throughout people's careers, that it's not just front-loaded in the academy and the FTO. We need to weave this into the fabric and the organization. And I'll go back to what I said before, is focus on what you control the controllable. Understand that you're in a position to lead, even if you're not in a formal leadership position. And you're in one of the most influential leadership positions in the organization. And there's times when it's tough, and when it gets tough, and when you're struggling, just remember to embrace the struggle, embrace the suck, look for the learning, look for the good, and be willing to dare to be great. And when we all do that, that's how we enhance the profession. So I want to thank all of you for all of the tremendous work that you guys do all year long, and for the great work that you do on these ILEETA live events. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
you guys.
Thank you all. We'll see you next month. Just hang on the line here, and we'll end.